Welcome to this episode of the Rethink Vertical podcast. Today is round 2 with Airwise Solutions Chief Technology Officer Josh O'Leary. If you'd like to hear Josh's full bio and synopsis of Airwise's software platform, make sure to check out our episode 1 of this conversation in the Rethink Vertical podcast repository. You can find that at www.uascluster.com/pages/podcast. So for a quick recap, Josh has spent the last 30 years developing products while empowering the people around him, from the inception of the product launch, engineering iterations to market penetration that take businesses to the next level. Our conversation today focused on UAS platforms for public good and how these business cases are leading the way to scalable commercial operations. I got a chance to talk about Airwise's specific work around drone as a first responder pilot projects, as well as some other drone-in-the-box solutions ripe to scale. I always learn a ton when speaking with Josh, and I'm sure you will as well. So hope you enjoy the episode. All right, Josh, welcome to the Rethink Vertical podcast, version 2. Good to have you on again.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. All right, so couple things I wanted to cover thinking about public service, but before we do that, our conversations, I know that Airwise had a lot going on over the last 6 to 12 months, and any updates that would be helpful for folks to know about?
We've had, a vast number of improvements and new features built into our software. We have an affiliate in UA Sidekick so that we are now a Lance provider and we can file NOTAMs. We can
nice.
Up with further coordinations. Soon to be SGIs as well.
Yeah. Very cool. I know that they had some projects sort of ongoing that you guys have now kind of come into, and I know DFR is one of the things that Airwise has been thinking a lot about. And there's other business models that we can chat about later, but I've been having a lot of conversations with folks about really scaling UAS platforms, commercial UAS platforms, and the regulatory environment will approve, regulations will come. They're talking about Part 108 by the end of the year. Thinking about what you're seeing on the horizon, where does this public service, public use for drones, drone as a first responder, where do you see that being the leading edge of scaling? How does you and Airwise kind of view that from a business perspective?
From a business perspective, certainly anything public safety related is easier for the FAA to get on board with.
Sure.
And there's a lot of good reasons for that at the end of the day, other than just saving lives. And in general, our first responders are, very careful with everything they do, and their goal is to save lives and protect people. So you want to make sure that everything they're doing falls in that category, and that's how they look at drones. So being able to deploy a DFR project, and I guess maybe we should clarify, and I'm referring to a drone-in-the-box type of DFR, not
yeah, that's a good clarification, right? There's different ways they're being used. So,
and they're all great. I mean, all of them are helpful, and all of them are, it's all for the betterment of everybody. But this is that, as you said, that leading edge, drone-in-the-box, functions remotely, autonomously. Something happens, in this case, say a 911 call comes in, you have the location of the 911 caller, the drone could be fed that and autonomously take off, deploy to that area, and then be manually taken over if necessary to look around and see what's happening. And you're like,
right.
Well, why does that matter? Well, obviously it matters for speed of response. You get a drone there much faster than you're going to get boots on the ground. A great example where we're deploying is next to the gathering place here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which also has the Arkansas River running next to it, and a new feature set called Zinc Lake. And it's going to be a very exciting and fun area where you can do different water sports and things of that nature. Well, now you have a 100-acre park that's one of the nicest ones in the country, that's very well attended, and then you have a water feature next to it. And I can tell you from talking to our first responders that they get a lot of calls, especially to the water area of the Arkansas River already, because people will be fishing, kayaking, playing, whatever they want to do.
Right.
And so if you have a good citizen going, hey, somebody's drowning in the river, they call 911. Yeah. And so it turns out about somewhere between 80 and 90% of the time when they get a drowning in the river call, it's actually somebody fishing or playing, sometimes a homeless person bathing.
Right, right.
But they don't need the response that they would normally do if there was truly a drowning situation, which is they bring a bunch of river apparatus. It tends to be like 5 fire vehicles, a couple of police vehicles, and then some sort of ambulance.
Right.
And if you're doing that, you're really taking resources from all over the city to respond to something that statistically 80 to 90% of the time you just don't need. So
Yeah.
if the drone can go and see, oh, this is a person fishing, then okay, this whole time the first responders are all still spooling up, but
Right.
the drone gets there within a minute and a half, so they can have video of it before they decide to leave the station or turn their lights on, and go, oh, we should just send a truck or two and maybe one police car for response if
Mm-hmm.
it's somebody fishing.
Right.
And like what you don't think about, and I didn't think about until people explained it to me from the first responder side, is every time they turn their lights on and they're running through red lights trying to get somewhere in a hurry, it puts everybody in jeopardy.
Sure.
And so some bad things happen. And like, so the fewer times you have that happening, then now you can once again lower the statistics of how many times have a police car, a fire truck, or an ambulance been involved in an accident going through an intersection. Well, you just lower those numbers. Even if the percentage doesn't change, since you have fewer vehicles doing it, everything drops.
Right.
And I don't know if you can actually put a price on that because people die from that.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can lower that at all, is it worth it? Because it doesn't cost that much to enact these programs based on what,
Right.
one person having a horrific moment.
Yeah.
Is it worth it? So, and
Yeah.
everybody we talk to says yes, but faster response times, higher safety, but then that interesting moment of resource allocation and safety of not running through red lights. The other thing is, what if it is a river rescue? Somebody's being swept downriver. If you go to the point where the person made the phone call,
Right.
that's not where that person that's in the water is anymore.
Right.
The
Right.
drone can be following them.
Yeah.
And then they can also go, oh, you need to be on the east or the west side of the river, deploy, they're on this side. And so you can also now be much more effective as a first responder. I could keep going, but there's so many layers that you don't think about until you start really digging in that this really is helpful.
Yeah. I think the value conversation is really interesting. I think that, when you look at the way the FAA has done approvals of this kind of new technology, they want something that obviously has a public good, but you think about, what's the true value of this system being deployed in the first responder context? And, you say, well, it's hard to put a value on that, although actuaries do it every day, right? They say, this is how much a human life is going to mean that when they build insurance policies, they know how much a human life is worth in certain circumstances. And so I'd be curious to know, have you heard of any large scale studies of what the true value of, using drones as a first responder to say hey, if, obviously we know how much it would cost the fire department to deploy one truck, and you can multiply that if you don't have to do that. And so build that case. But just like you said, going through red lights, not having to do that. If 80% of these calls are not realistic drowning situations, how many red lights not being run, and what's the value statistically of that? It'd be interesting to see if someone had done that, or maybe we should do that, because I think you could make the case that there's a huge value to society, and so that helps accelerate the approval process from the regulator. I don't know if there's any of those studies been done, and you guys probably have heard of them if there are, but I'm just kind of curious if you've heard of anything.
I have not seen that specific study, and I agree that it would be a great one to do, and it's something that we have talked about, seeing if we can get data so that we can do at least a preliminary one. But I have not seen anything at scale where they've gone, here's how we think this has saved X number of dollars, and here's the reasons why.
Right.
I mean, you can look at say Chula Vista real quick and see they feel like that they've lowered calls by a huge amount. I'm trying to remember how many times they said. I apologize, it's not off the top of my head right now, but they've had the drone clear many calls, and I think it's a pretty respectable amount. And I apologize, I'm not going to quote something I don't remember, but it was a very high number. Hey, we didn't have to send a police car at all. So it's a fantastic tool there.
Yeah, and just for folks that maybe don't know about the Chula Vista Police Department, they were one of the first police departments to go out and get waivers, to try to get waivers for more extensive drone operations, as opposed to just some officer flying a drone line of sight and doing Overwatch. They've are they using the drone in the box concept as well, or how are they operating?
They are not. They are using a certain amount of BV loss. They were since they were some of the pioneers at this. They were basically having visual observers on rooftops at first. And they would still fly remotely, but they would have the VOs in contact, of course, with the And I don't know their specific operations at this second, but I know that they do have some amount of BB loss capability, if not a lot.
Right. So walk me through then traditionally. So we know that police departments and even some fire departments have used drones for a while in certain capacities. Kind of walk me through how they've traditionally been used, how they are used at a unit level versus what you guys at Airwise are trying to sort of push the envelope and like what that operation looks like.
Sure. There's a couple of layers of that. So traditionally, and still in most places, it's kind of a
Mm-hmm.
one-to-one moment. You have one drone to one operator, and that operator is then in contact generally, through radio, possibly through cellular, to the rest of their group. And they're going, I can see, if it's a police officer, I can see somebody running around the back of this house. If
Mm-hmm.
it's a firefighter, they can be like, I see somebody stuck in this window. But now nobody can see that except for that one operator. So now they're having to verbally guide people to what they're talking about. So that's kind of the original and still the most common.
Right. So that requires the police departments then to go out and buy their own fleet of drones, train their own officers, have their own programs stood up, which is pretty staff and intensive and like with the way budgets are. I'm sure there's always some resistance to doing that, but we've seen that it's been so valuable that they've done it anyways, right? So kind of talk about what you guys are thinking now and how you could reduce some staff time and maybe make efficiencies.
Sure.
Yeah.
The second layer of that, because I'm going to call it three. So there's the first one we
Okay.
just talked about. The middle layer is still essentially doing that, but now you have the drone connected to the cloud. It doesn't have to be flown from it. It can just be, hey, my location and my video are streaming to the cloud.
Mm-hmm.
And now we have a common operational picture that shows a 3D image of everything in that area. So you can see where the drone is in relation to buildings and a base map, and also to where any other kind of data you want on there, whether it be police cars, fire trucks, location of the actual pilot, any kind of assets you want to put in there. So now you can have a three-dimensional view of everything. You can have ADS-BN, you can have radar, you can have remote ID. So now you know what your airspace is doing in low altitude, because we talk about air traffic control. I mean, you know better than anybody. Like, it's up there, way up in the air. You just use vertical separation to keep everyone safe. When you're talking about everything flying under 400 feet, and that vertical separation gets really hinky. And
Mm-hmm.
so being able to see, you twist, pardon me, I'm not using my hands, but when you
Mm-hmm.
twist everything into that third dimension, now you can actually access that low altitude air and understand, okay, well, that drone is up here. This drone's here. There's a police helicopter over here. There's a Cessna
Mm-hmm.
flying in over here. Oh, it's at 1,000 feet. I'm probably okay. But like, you can get all this data as a user and as an emergency operations command, knowing what's happening in your airspace and on the ground. So that's what's really interesting, in my opinion, about what we're doing is, and this will feed over into the drone in the box aspect in a minute.
Yeah.
But that common operation picture is really the key. Can I see all of my assets, air and ground, plus anything stationary, weather data, airspace data, all in
Mm-hmm.
one space? And then now, anytime I have one of those objects on my three-dimensional map, if I click on it, I get more data, whether it's altitude and battery remaining, or it's a video link that says, oh, there's a live video feed for this drone. And there's a thermal video feed. You click those, you populate a new window with those video feeds. So now, one of the things that has always driven me nuts about trying to watch remote video is I
Mm-hmm.
don't have any context about what I'm looking at. Like, I know that I'm looking at a building on fire, let's say. I don't know if I'm looking, northeast, west, whatever. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So now, if I can look at a drone image on a three-dimensional map that shows me which way I'm pointing and where it is on a map, I go, oh, I'm over this apartment complex. And I know this because I live here and this is where I work, right?
Right.
And here's the video feed, so I know exactly what I'm looking at. So now I can also look and go, all my fire trucks are over here. I need to redeploy this one to the back over here. I see this piece over here. The fire is really hot on thermal over here. I can tell people where to go and what to do effectively. And now I can also share that video feed with people on the ground. And if I want to, I could also share the telemetry where I can show the 3D map. But really, people on the ground probably know what they're looking at already.
Right.
So they just need to be on their phones and they can say, okay, the drone is right here. I can see, oh, I see somebody trapped over here. I know where to go now. I know what to expect.
Right.
If I'm a police officer, and now I can see, oh, suspect is hiding behind a dumpster around this fence, and I'm on the other side of the fence. Okay, I know what's going on now.
Right.
So otherwise, I had to do that based on verbal communications, which are better than nothing. But now I can actually see it, and it's, at least for me, I find that to be much more effective at getting data across. So now
Right.
you move that over to the drone in the box moment. And so now you get all those benefits we talked about earlier of not having people running lights and not having to deploy too many resources to something that's not necessary, and speed of deployment. Like we were literally doing a test for the site that we're going to be on, and we were just doing a range test.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were on top of the building we were planning on putting the box on. We were on that building for less than 30 minutes. We got a call that there was a lost kid in the park. We went with the drone and found him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like literally
just out there,
just out there for 30 minutes. Yeah, I mean
Right.
it's crazy. So like the ability to use these things quickly and effectively, it's hard to overstate. I mean, you don't see it until you start using them.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's one of those systems where the value really, you start to see the real value when it's available to be used in all those scenarios that maybe you would have, yeah, a lost child in the park. They would have sent out a couple officers. The parents have been wandering around,
Mm-hmm.
and now they have a whole nother asset that they never thought that, oh, we'd use it for that as well, right? And now they have access to that. So, when you're talking about the common operating picture and the folks getting that data, you really envision from a first responder aspect that these need to be trained firefighters and trained police officers looking at the data and deciding what. So it's like that operational command perspective, or do you see that there's just certain levels? Like sometimes you will and sometimes you don't, right? It just depends on the whatever's going on. Is that how you guys are looking at it? How are you going to train? Who's going to get trained, and how are they going to get trained to operate your system if they're
Well,
working
the
on
system
that?
is designed to be extremely simple to use. And I mean, we've heard time and time again from police and fire to make it, and the police are the ones that are the hardest on themselves. They'll be like, make this cop proof, make it so it's easy for anybody to
Right.
use.
Right.
And so that's been our goal the whole time, is to make it as easy as possible to use. We will continue to do that, and then more features get put in, and then we're also, every time we put a new feature in, we're trying to figure out how to make it as ergonomic as possible so it's easy to access the data without making it overwhelming. Because that's the thing, is like I talked about, all those features that we have, that's only a small number of the layers we can add for data. But if you're busy and something bad is happening, all those layers aren't helpful. And so you just turn them all off, except for the ones you care about. Where are my people? Where are my vehicles? Where are my air assets? That's all I care about right now. And you can do that in a very quick and easy way. Now, to answer your question, do you always have to have somebody highly trained on the back end of this? You really don't. The people that need to be highly trained are the ones looking at that common operation picture and looking at the video so they can command people properly. The person that's on charge of the drone, since it's mainly autonomous, is just to make sure things aren't going haywire.
Right. So the scene commander would have access to the operating picture, and they could see. They don't.
Correct.
They know the platform's out there operating. They don't care about that. They just care about what's coming back from that platform, from a data perspective.
And they just need to be able to communicate with the drone operator. Go, I need you over here, or I want you looking
Right.
at this.
Right. Huh. Okay, so we've talked about first responders. I mean, as I'm thinking about the platform and what it does and the data that's collected, like what are the other business models that are sort of ripe for this type of technology that you guys are thinking about?
I mean, certainly infrastructure is a fantastic use case. It could be any form. It could be electrical transmission, substations, refineries, pipelines, Department of Transportation's, solar farms, wind farms. I can give examples of each one, but the idea is if you have an asset that's deployable autonomously anytime you need it, it makes it easier to go out and do inspections and more likely for those inspections to occur. Because otherwise, you have to pay a human to get in a car and go to these assets and look them over. And that can get very expensive if they're not close to town or it's close to where that individual is. Also, like let's use an example of substations, right? So substations, you have a lightning storm. We take in lightning data so we know pinpoint lightning strikes. Say that a substation gets hit, or say that something else happens. Pick it, a car runs into it, whatever. You know something is wrong. The drone can be deployed anytime weird, anomalous data happens. Like if you have your power fluctuate or that particular substation goes down, you pick it. It could be a sensor that says, I heard a gunshot. You pick whatever you want. That vehicle now gets deployed and starts looking around to see what's wrong. So now you have instantaneous eyes on, if there's a problem and what needs to be done. And now you can deploy people if necessary. If you were, let's just use like solar farms, right? If you have solar panels in the sun, when they are not functioning well, tend to get hotter than the rest of them. So if you have a thermal camera, and you're having some sort of fluctuation in power development, your grid, how much am I actually making? You can start having a drone look. And if it starts to see hotspots, it can go, well, you have bad panels over here.
Yeah.
I'm way oversimplifying this, but this is the
Yeah,
general.
we get it. Yeah, I mean that makes
Yeah.
sense. Makes sense.
And obviously security. Like if you wanted to use these kind of things for security, now you just deploy a drone. Obviously, if you have strobes and you have ideally some sort of speaker, like some sort of megaphone on it,
Yeah.
now interact. Hey, you're loitering. Move on. Or
Right.
I see you. Anything to
Right.
deter people.
Right.
A drone with bright flashing lights and everything tends to make people at least think twice.
Right. So the number of use cases, I mean, I think probably will continue to expand. I mean, there are other companies kind of working in this space, but the market seems significant, right? So do you see a place where you'll have a number of companies doing what you're talking about, serving this sort of sector, all competing against each other for business, or do you see like one or two folks sort of like leading out and capturing the majority of the market share, or is it like there's still too many unknowns because the regulatory environment still has some unknowns, or do you guys feel like you can see what's coming down the pipe from the FAA clear enough to know that within the next 18 to 24 months there'll be enough scalability for this platform to function? Like what does that look like if you had your crystal ball? What does that look like for you guys right now? not to put you on the spot, but I mean, I know there's a lot of companies that want to compete in this like data common operating picture, and there's all the different pieces to that, right? Like how these platforms work. It's airspace visualization, it's detect and avoid. They'll all have to sort of figure out how to work together. But are there going to be one or two winners? Or is there going to be space for 5 to 10 different companies all providing these services because there's so many business case opportunities?
It depends on how you want to look at it. I would actually like to think there'd be space for 5 to 10 because I think that's better for the ecosystem.
Yeah.
I mean, I say that obviously as one of those companies where I'd rather be the one, but I mean,
right.
Realistically speaking.
I mean, I say that because, from my perspective, if I look at a lot of the operations that you're talking about, if you start to hear what the FAA is hinting at what Part 108 will look like, my guess is that a lot of these type of operations, even beyond visual line of sight, will be captured under that new rule. And if that rule comes out and makes all these different use cases available without a waiver, I just don't see how one or two companies can scale fast enough to capture all the opportunity. There's just going to be so much more room because it's like the floodgates are going to open with that new rule.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
when 108 comes out, that is going to be a game changer for everybody. It'll be fascinating to see what the ruling really ends up being.
Yeah,
and how easy it is to meet the requirements.
Sure. Yeah, that's the unknown. So really, from a company perspective, you guys are trying to make sure you're right at the starting line, and have had enough traction and test cases doing all the hard work to where the scaling is just like it's just hiring more people and building capacity. You've already solved and done all the hard work in the back end, so you just know what you need to do and meet those requirements. That's really what you guys are doing right now.
Oh yeah, I mean, getting out there and just getting it done, right? Getting use case data, working with the FAA, working with stakeholders, getting use data, showing that it works, showing what's safe, what's not safe, how do you mitigate what's not safe, and I mean, all those are going to be massively important to make sure this goes over well.
Right. Do you think do you think the industry has enough data to really know what's safe and what's not on these types of operations? Or do you think there's like a severe limitation because these types of problems, I mean, you talk about it, like the approval process to go through a regulator to even get something like you're proposing in Tulsa, it's not an overnight thing, right? It takes time. And so is there enough data yet to know what's safe and what's not? What do you think?
So I think the answer is yes and no.
Yeah.
As far as to do it broadly, no, we don't have enough use case data. To
Yeah.
do it in a narrow use case to prove later on the broader
Yeah.
one is the answer is yes. I mean, we've been flying drones as a nation and as a globe for a long time now.
Yeah.
And so we generally know what works well. And I mean, honestly, if you think about it, I've been building multi rotors for 15-ish years,
Mm-hmm.
and they weren't real reliable when I started.
Things
And
have changed, definitely,
things have
right?
changed a lot,
Right.
and massively for the better. I mean, you get a lot of mean time between failure on just about every aspect of a multi rotor now. Is it quantifiable? Yes. Has it been quantified? No, not really. And
Right.
so, I mean, we got to figure out how to do that. But that's why examples of like this use case is so important for the industry, because we're going to be running things day in and day out. We're going to be
Right.
running in a real world environment and very
And that's what's
controlled.
lacking, right? That's what's lacking right now. That I mean, there's you look at Skydio's big thing is they fly drones indoors 24/7 to try. So, it's one thing to do that. And it's another thing to put them in a real world environment and run them over and over and
Mhm.
over again. And that data can only be gotten by actually doing the operations, right? And
Yeah.
so we haven't yet gotten there yet. Yeah, it's really interesting. Um, all right, so we've talked about infrastructure. We've talked about the sort of first responder. Any other interesting business models that you guys are sort of like just looking at superficially to go, this might be something that is interesting. Maybe it's like some of the interesting pieces of data that you could gather that would think, I because I constantly think about and I've shared this before. I don't know if it's been one of these podcasts is about the concept of developing the iPhone. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars developing the platform. No one could have foreseen all the things that were built on top of that,
Hmm.
right? Do you think this industry is the same as like we've got some ideas of how this data and this platform will be used? We really don't know until it's out there operating and people are getting really creative about, oh, we could do this with it. We could do this with this data. Do you kind of see the same thing?
I do. I do. I mean,
Yeah.
when you start talking about smartphones, that was such a platform. I don't know if we'll see quite that same effect,
Mm-hmm.
but
Right.
the definitely there's going to be a lot of ways to use these that are not thought of. And I actually do have insight into a few, but I can't say because there are other
Yeah.
companies that I know that I've told I wouldn't say things about.
Right.
There's some
Right.
really, really clever and smart use cases that are already popping up, and they will just continue to do so as people, especially like once it's you can do it and you can make money doing it, and
Yeah.
the FAA will allow you to do it.
Right.
I think that's when we're going to see people really
Sure.
like you're going to see all sorts of use cases start popping up everywhere.
Right. Right. No, that's a good point. Um, and from the investment side too, right? That's when the investors start to step in when they see a clear path to revenue. People are making money. They have customers, right? Okay, so last question, and this one is more public acceptance, right? So I remember, not having a lot of experience with drones, and I think the first real experience that I had with a commercial drone was actually with you guys a couple years back, and you guys were doing some scanning of a. It was at a conference, and you were running a little scanning sort of pilot around the fairgrounds and operating the drone at like 200 feet. And I think as much as everybody else, was just fascinated that you couldn't hear it, you couldn't see it, like you didn't know it was there. Um, do you think that from a public acceptance standpoint, I mean, if you're talking about scaling at the level that we think is going to happen, these things are going to be operating all the time, all over the place. They're going to be mixing with companies doing drone delivery and then folks doing inspection. Do you think public acceptance is still going to be really hard, or is it once they start to get out there and people realize that it's not as intrusive, or maybe it's more intrusive than they think? Like, how do you see that playing out? You've been around drones for a long time. You know how intrusive or unintrusive they can be. Now we do, I have been at a park and had a drone right over my head, and then you obviously know it's there. But from the operations that you guys do, is it still a challenge?
Personally, when I have been out using drones, generally publicly, I've been in many states doing it. People are generally just interested. I
Yeah.
rarely come across somebody that's hostile about it.
Right.
Uh, it's happened, but it's not the norm. Now, in terms of like acceptance, you got to. I think what's going to matter is like if somebody can get Amazon to deliver them the widget that they need in 10 minutes after they hit
Mm-hmm.
go, like buy. I think you're going to see widespread acceptance because of the ease of it.
Right.
If it's mainly being used for things that don't affect that, like that standard citizen, they'll accept it, but it won't be as rapid because they're not seeing something that changes their daily life.
Right.
Like, so
Yeah.
that's the short version. I mean, I could go into more detail, but that's my short statement there is like,
Yeah.
if it's providing services for somebody, those people are going to be like, I love this. Hey, you need to try this, Bob, and then that's going to really accelerate the acceptance. If you're doing it like now, like with the DFR project, you start finding lost kids, you start pulling people out of rivers by giving good data. That's people are going to accept that because that stories will spread. Like the lost kid one, that's going to get spread really fast. Like, hey, it got found by a drone. I mean, you know what I mean? Those are the kind of things that will help. If you just see them all over the place in the air and they don't seem to be bothering you, especially if you're being careful with, like, we're going to have to talk about airspace and airspace ownership and whatever, and that's been going on forever. So I don't know if there's any clear definitions of that, but if we are people don't know, like if you're flying over somebody's backyard, transiting to another, like an EMS moment where somebody needs you because of an emergency, is that person that had that backyard, are they going to be like, you were spying on me as you flew over?
Right.
Maybe. And that's not what's happening, but that might be how you feel.
Right.
And then the question is, can you show, because as we, I think, know in general, drones have wide angle lenses. So it's really hard to see individuals from a couple 100 feet up. Now, the newer ones have fantastic telephoto options. So that may become more of an issue. But it's, I think really just a matter of, are you providing a service that people feel is valuable? And if you are, whether it's for safety or ease of something, I think you'll get pretty rapid acceptance.
Right. And probably that moment of adoption when there'll be some headwinds, and then there'll be a moment in time where it's gotten to a scale and size where people just become accustomed to it. Like we have many things. TBD on public acceptance then, right?
Yeah.
large scale. So,
yes.
All right, Josh. Well, it's been as usual. It's always a pleasure to have conversations, hear more about what's going on with Airwise, and just chat personally. Appreciate you taking out some time to talk with us.
Always.
Until next time. If you'd like to be a part of the UAS Cluster Initiative community and get access to more of our content, check us out at www.uascluster.com.